when late-night TV host Brandon Shaw decided to boost his declining ratings by mocking Keanu Reeves on his TAC show. He had no idea that the soft-spoken actor would end his entire career with a single, perfectly calculated response. In an instant, the power dynamic shifted, leaving Brandon exposed in front of millions as the audience who once laughed at his jokes erupted in support of Hollywood's most beloved star. The consequences would shatter one man's reputation while cementing the legacy of the other in ways neither could have predicted. Before we continue the story, tell us in the comment below, where are you watching from? And if you like these kinds of stories, make sure to subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow at 7 p.m. we have an amazing fresh story lined up for you. Brandon Shaw had been the face of After with Brandon Shaw for 6 years. At 42, his once meteoric rise in the late-night TV ranks had stalled. His sandy blonde hair now required increasing amounts of product to maintain the casually messy look that once seemed effortless. The smile lines around his blue eyes had deepened into something more permanent, no longer fading when his expression turned serious. Network executives had been clear 3 months earlier: improve the ratings or prepare for cancellation. Brandon's show had been steadily losing viewers to newer, fresher competitors who understood the rapidly evolving landscape of viral clips and social media. His brand of humor, once seen as edgy, now often came off as mean-spirited in a cultural climate that increasingly valued authenticity and kindness. "We need a moment, Brandon," his executive producer Melissa Winters had told him that morning. "Something people will talk about, share, react to. The Q3 numbers are disastrous." At 51, Melissa had steered numerous shows through the choppy waters of network television. Her black hair streaked with silver was always pulled into a tight bun, and she wore exclusively tailored outfits that projected authority and practical efficiency. She had been with Brandon from the start, but lately their relationship had become strained as the show's prospects dimmed. "Tonight's the night," Brandon had reassured her, tapping his pencil nervously against the desk. "Keanu Reeves is booked. I've got material that's going to wake everybody up." Melissa had furrowed her brow slightly. "Just remember, he's one of the most beloved actors in Hollywood. People are protective of him." Brandon had waved off her concern. "Trust me, it'll be fine. Everyone knows it's all in fun." But it wasn't all in fun. Brandon had spent 3 days with his writing team crafting jokes that walked the line between mockery and ridicule. He was desperate for a viral moment, and desperation rarely produces wisdom. Keanu, on the other hand, hadn't thought much about his upcoming After's appearance. At 59, he was promoting his latest film Reclamation, a character-driven drama critics were already calling the most nuanced performance of his career. The press tour had been exhausting, but Keanu maintained the same quiet kindness that had endeared him to fans and colleagues during his decades in Hollywood. His publicist, Diana Chun, had added Brandon's show to the schedule with some hesitation. At 35, Diana was sharp and fiercely protective of her clients. She had been with Keanu for 7 years and developed both professional respect and personal affection for the actor, who treated everyone, from directors to production assistants, with the same genuine warmth. "Brandon Shaw's ratings are slipping," she warned. "He might try something unexpected to stir buzz." Keanu simply nodded. "We all do what we have to. It'll be fine." That calm acceptance of others' motives was characteristic of Keanu, who had weathered personal tragedy and the fickleness of Hollywood with a philosophical outlook often mistaken for simplicity by those who didn't know him well. When the night of the show arrived, the After studio buzzed with an energy it hadn't felt in months. Word had somehow spread that Brandon had something special planned for the Keanu interview, and the audience was bracing for fireworks. Brandon, energized by the crowd, strutted on stage with renewed confidence for his opening monologue. "We've got a great show tonight," he announced after some initial jokes. "Keanu Reeves will be here. You know, the guy who's been playing the same character for 30 years, just with different hairstyles." The audience laughed, though a few exchanged uncertain glances. Brandon pushed on. "I had to brush up on my woe, excellent, before this interview," he said in a surfer drawl, an impersonation Keanu hadn't played in decades. Backstage, Diana frowned as she watched the monitor. Keanu remained composed. "We can still cancel," she murmured. "It's all right," Keanu replied gently. "He's doing what he thinks he needs to do." When it was finally time for Keanu's interview, Brandon rode the wave of audience energy. Keanu entered to thunderous applause, dressed simply in a worn black suit and a white shirt, his dark hair, slightly long, tucked behind his ears. He greeted the crowd with a sincere smile and gave Brandon a firm handshake before taking his seat. Keanu Reeves, ladies and gentlemen. Man, it's great to have you here, Brandon began, his voice tinged with forced enthusiasm. I was worried you might be too busy learning how to express emotion. The audience reaction was mixed, nervous laughter with some shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Keanu took the jab gracefully, offering a small smile and a polite nod. Thanks for having me, Brandon. Happy to be here. So, Reclamation, your new movie. I saw it and I've got to say, it's 2 hours of my life I'll never get back, Brandon continued, doubling down. I mean, it was like watching paint dry. Really, really sad paint. A murmur rippled through the audience. This wasn't the usual light-hearted teasing of a talk show. Brandon was being deliberately cruel. Keanu's expression stayed neutral, though something flickered briefly in his dark eyes. It's a story of loss and redemption, he replied calmly. Not everyone's cup of tea. We all are, but we're proud of it. Loss and redemption, Brandon repeated with a smirk. Like the loss of my will to live while watching it. Hey, speaking of loss, let's talk about your acting career in the 2000s. In the control room, Melissa pressed her fingers to her temples. He's going too far, she murmured to the director. This isn't what we discussed. On stage, Brandon was building what he imagined would be his viral moment. You know, I have to ask, how do you keep getting work? Is it some kind of Hollywood charity program for actors with exactly one facial expression? The audience laughter had grown noticeably tense. A few people booed. Something had shifted. Misreading the room and too committed to his plan, Brandon kept going. I mean, I've seen mannequins with more emotional range. But hey, they keep paying you millions, so who's the real genius, right? The studio fell into an uncomfortably thick silence. Camera operators exchanged glances. The band leader looked down at his shoes. In the control room, Melissa sat frozen, her expression unreadable. Then, with calm deliberation, she leaned slightly forward in her chair. When she spoke, her voice was soft, but clear enough to carry across the now silent studio. You know, Brandon, Keanu began, my mother taught me that when someone is cruel, it's rarely about you. It's almost always because they're hurting themselves. He paused, letting the words sink in. I hope whatever you're going through gets better. The simplicity and compassion of the reply hit like a lightning bolt. There was a stunned beat of silence. Then the audience erupted in applause. Genuine, sustained applause that quickly turned into a standing ovation. Brandon's face turned deep red. He tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out choked and fake. In one sentence, Keanu hadn't just deflected the attack. He had revealed the desperation behind it, turning himself from target to sympathetic figure, while exposing Brandon as the bully he had become. We'll be right back after these messages, Brandon managed as the show cut to commercial. Backstage was chaos. Melissa confronted Brandon immediately. What the hell was that? She asked, her voice low but intense. That's not what we agreed on. You didn't create a moment. You committed career suicide. On live TV. Brandon paced, running his hands through his carefully styled hair. It was supposed to be funny. The audience wasn't with me tonight. People are too sensitive these days. No, Brandon. They're not too sensitive. You were too cruel. And to exactly the wrong person. Melissa checked her phone, already buzzing with notifications. Social media is blowing up, and not in your favor. Meanwhile, in Keanu's dressing room, the actor sat quietly as Diana handled calls and messages. You all right? She asked during a brief pause. I'm okay, Keanu replied. Brandon's going through a tough time. I understand the pressure in this business. You're too forgiving, Diana said, shaking her head, stunned. That was completely unprofessional and personally offensive. Life's too short to hold grudges, Keanu said simply. I just said what needed to be said. When the show resumed, the atmosphere had shifted palpably. Brandon steered the conversation to safer ground. Reclamation's plot, Keanu's motorcycle collection, his charity work. Keanu answered with his usual measured, thoughtful responses, showing no sign of ill will. But the damage was done. The audience, once firmly in Brandon's corner, had shifted its loyalty. Every joke Brandon attempted fell flat. Every time Keanu spoke, the audience hung on his words. By the time the segment ended, Brandon's desperation was obvious, in the sweat beading his forehead, in the forced quality of his smile as he thanked Keanu for appearing. His voice carried an emptiness that betrayed his awareness of defeat. Keanu, for his part, shook Brandon's hand firmly, and thanked him for the interview with apparent sincerity, walking off stage to thunderous applause. The contrast between the two men couldn't have been more stark. One diminished, the other elevated. The consequences were swift and ruthless. By midnight, clips of the exchange had gone viral everywhere. Cultural commentators dissected the moment, praising Keanu's composure and dignity while condemning Brandon's cheap tactics. Former guests came forward with stories of similar backstage treatment. Within days, think pieces began appearing with headlines like "The Death of Mean Comedy" and "Keanu Reeves and the Power of Compassion." Brandon's initial response, a social media apology claiming his comments were just comedy and taken out of context, only fueled the backlash. Melissa Winters resigned as executive producer the next day, unwilling to go down with what she now recognized as a sinking ship. A week after the infamous interview, network executives summoned Brandon for a meeting. The atmosphere was grim. The decision had already been made. "Advertisers are pulling out," the network president said bluntly. "Your Q3 numbers were bad. Now this. We're invoking the morality clause in your contract. You're firing me over one bad interview?" Brandon's voice rose in disbelief. "After 6 years? It's not just one interview, Brandon. It's a pattern that culminated in that interview," the president replied. "We've had complaints about your treatment of guests for years, but the ratings justified looking the other way. Now we have neither ratings nor public goodwill." Brandon left the network building that day with no show. His personal items were packed in a cardboard box by an assistant as he pushed through the exit doors. A cluster of paparazzi, once there to capture his stardom, now stood ready to document his fall. "Any comment on your firing, Brandon?" one shouted. "Did you really think you could take aim at Keanu and win?" asked another. Brandon pushed past them without answering, his face hard with anger and humiliation. Meanwhile, Reclamation debuted with record-breaking box office numbers, fueled by the wave of public support for Keanu after the interview. Critics who had initially praised the film now raised their ratings, finding even more depth in Keanu's performance in light of the grace he had shown in real life. Diana managed countless requests for follow-up interviews and statements about the incident, which Keanu politely declined. When pressed, he simply said, "It was an unfortunate moment. I wish Brandon the best." 3 months later, Afters had been replaced by a new show hosted by a rising comic known for her sharp wit and genuine interactions with guests. Brandon Shaw had virtually vanished from the public eye. His agent said he was taking time to reflect and develop new projects. But industry insiders whispered that his phone had completely stopped ringing. On a crisp autumn evening, Keanu was leaving a small independent bookstore in New York when he spotted a familiar figure sitting alone at a cafe across the street. Brandon Shaw looked different, thinner, with messy hair and several days of stubble. He stared into a cup of coffee with the vacant expression of someone who had lost their way. For a moment, Keanu considered crossing the street. Maybe a private conversation, away from cameras and crowds, could offer some closure or healing. But as he watched, a woman approached Brandon's table. From her animated gestures and the way she shoved her phone toward him, it was clear she was confronting him. Another random person who felt entitled to say her piece to a fallen public figure. Keanu saw Brandon's shoulders slump, saw the weary resignation on his face as he endured yet another storm he hadn't chosen. In that moment, Keanu recognized that approaching Brandon now wouldn't be an act of kindness. It might be another humiliation, another echo of the moment that had defined his downfall. Instead, Keanu turned and continued down the street, pulling up his collar against the evening chill. Some lessons, he knew, must be learned in solitude. Some consequences must be faced alone. And sometimes, the most compassionate response is to allow someone the dignity of their private reckoning. 6 months after the infamous interview, Keanu received a humanitarian award for his years of quiet philanthropy. A body of work only discovered when journalists digging into Brandon's background uncovered Keanu's many anonymous donations to children's hospitals and cancer research. At the ceremony, a young reporter asked if he had any thoughts about Brandon Shaw, who had recently announced a new podcast focused on accountability, growth, and comedy that uplifts rather than tears down. Keanu considered the question carefully before answering. "I believe we all have the capacity to learn and grow. I wish him success in his new efforts." Brandon's podcast launched with significant attention, though more from morbid curiosity than genuine interest in his new perspective. The first episode, where he attempted to explain his actions from that fateful night, received mixed reviews. Some found his reflections sincere. Others saw the calculated positioning of a man trying to rehabilitate his image. The truth lay somewhere in between. Brandon had indeed been forced to confront the darkest parts of his comedy and personality, but old habits die hard. During one particularly difficult recording session, when a guest gently challenged his version of events, Brandon's mask slipped. A flash of the same defensive arrogance that had ruined him returned. His producer, a young woman who had taken the job hoping to be part of a real redemption arc, saw that flicker of anger in his eyes. After the session, she quietly handed in her resignation. The incident never made headlines, but within the industry, it confirmed what many suspected. Brandon Shaw had learned to mimic remorse without fully embracing the lessons behind it. Meanwhile, Keanu's career continued its upward path. After Reclamation, he chose a project that surprised many, a supporting role in a small indie film directed by a first-time filmmaker whose vision had captured his imagination. The film, made on a shoestring budget, became a critical darling and launched the young director's career. When asked why he chose such a modest project when major studios were competing for his involvement, Keanu's answer was, as always, simple. It was a good story that needed to be told. As he accepted his humanitarian award, Keanu's short speech never mentioned Brandon Shaw by name, though his closing words seemed to echo their encounter. "Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do," Keanu said, his voice soft but resonant in the silent auditorium, "is to recognize the pain in others instead of responding with our own. In the end, what matters isn't winning the moment, but how we treat each other along the way." The audience rose in a standing ovation. Backstage, a production assistant who had once worked on Afters approached him hesitantly. "Mr. Reeves," she said, "I just wanted to thank you. I was there that night with Brandon. What you did, it changed things. Not just for him, but for all of us who worked there. It was like everyone suddenly remembered there was a different way to be." Keanu shook her hand warmly. "What's your name?" "Sarah," she replied. "I'm not directing anything big yet, but I'm getting there." "I'd love to hear about your project sometime," Keanu said, with genuine interest. As the industry moved on and new controversies replaced the memory of Brandon's fall, a tangible shift remained. In network meetings, in writers' rooms across Hollywood, "To do a Brandon" had become shorthand for crossing the line from comedy to cruelty. It was a lesson not written in policy handbooks, but etched into the collective memory of an industry that had witnessed the perfect demonstration of how to wield true power. Not the power that comes from tearing others down, but the power of remaining true to your better nature, especially, and most powerfully, when under attack. And somewhere, in a half-empty comedy club on the outskirts of Las Vegas, Brandon Shaw continued his slow climb back from the shadows, one reluctant audience member at a time, forever defined by the moment Keanu Reeves had destroyed him, not with a devastating comeback, but with simple, undeniable kindness. Thank you for watching. If the story warms your heart, subscribe to the channel and click the screen for more inspirational stories of resilience, compassion, and hope.